Hey guys, what is up? So this week's video is a little bit different. If you watched my last week's video, I did say that I was going to make a video about why I went home for the month of February and kind of the things that I was dealing with. I mentioned getting help for some things that I was struggling with. So that's what this video is going to be about. When I was 15, I had a lot of things going on with my family. When I was 15, turning 16 is when I became super depressed. I started struggling with anxiety. Pretty much from my freshman year of high school to my senior year of high school, I struggled really hard with anxiety and depression. I was diagnosed and I've been on medication since then. I've gone through the works of figuring out what antidepressants work for me, anxiety medication, going on and off of it. Within those 4 years, I was also sexually assaulted. And about 2 years ago, almost exactly, I made the decision to drop out of college. I was really suicidal. My anxiety and my depression were at an all-time high. I had never taken the time to really deal with those issues, and I just kept shoving them deeper and deeper inside of myself, and it was literally eating me alive. Backtracking, in high school, I did see a couple of therapists, and I just never found one that I really connected with. I would talk to my school counselor a lot, and I never found anything that was very finalized and that was very helpful. And so after I graduated high school, I decided to defer a semester and backpack around Europe for 2 months. I had just gotten out of a somewhat serious relationship, and I just wasn't ready to jump right back into school. I just felt so lost and confused, and in my mind, I just needed to get as far away from my hometown as possible because it just held so much grief and bad memories and anxiety, and my solution at that time was to run away. So I went to Europe for 2 months. I went to 11 countries, and I had one of the best 2 months of my entire life. I'm not gonna lie, it was what I needed at that time. And then I got back and I went to school. I did my first year of college, and then I got really sick and I had to take a medical leave of absence. I had to have surgery. I spent pretty much that whole summer like at home because I had complications from my surgery and I was just so ill. And then I went back to school, and that's when everything changed. So after I went back to school after my surgery, it was my first semester of my sophomore year of college, I was pretty much non-functional at that point. I got an emotional support animal who helped so much. That's Wrigley, my cat. But it got to the point where I was terrified to sleep, and I would wake up at 4 in the morning in hysterics. Like, I would just wake up crying. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was having night terrors, nightmares. I would call my mom in Colorado and just sit on the phone with her for the next like 3 hours just crying because I just couldn't function. And then I would go to school that day or whatever. I was just so exhausted. I couldn't function in my classes. I wasn't giving 100%. I was so stressed out. Just nothing was working for me. So I made the decision to move home and quit school. And while I was home, that first week that I got home, my parents were actually on a cruise, and I had attempted suicide. And one of my mom's friends, she's our neighbor, she was cat sitting watching my parents' cat, and she had found me. So she took me to the emergency room, and I was evaluated by a psychiatrist, and she is still to this day my therapist. She basically gave me 2 options. She said, one, you could either admit yourself into a psychiatric center, or we can put you on a 72-hour suicide hold and you're gonna still end up in the psychiatric center. So it was kind of just my decision, whatever I wanted to do, but I was still gonna end up in the same spot. So I spent 2 weeks at a psychiatric center in Colorado, and then from there I moved back to California, which is where I've been ever since. And I didn't go back to school, but I have still really struggled with my mental health. And specifically, my biggest trigger was because I was sexually assaulted. It happened more than once. When I was underage, I was in high school. It was someone that I knew and trusted, and it's been really hard for me to deal with. I have issues with intimacy and connecting with people, and if you know me on a personal level, you know that it has always been a dream of mine to get married, have kids, be a mother, be a wife. I've wanted that from a young age. I'm only 22, and I would get married in a heartbeat. Like, I'm such an old soul that way. day. It's really frustrating to want something so bad and then for your body and your mind to physically reject those feelings. And I just was constantly having nightmares. I mean, I'm on sleeping medication because my night terrors and my nightmares were so bad that I don't sleep. And when you don't sleep, you can't function. Like, your body doesn't reset and you just tire yourself down. So that brings us back to January of this year. I was just in such a bad place. I missed my family so much. I didn't want to go to work. I didn't want to see anyone. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't taking care of my body or my mind. Nothing brought me joy. I was always anxious. So I made the decision to move home just for the month of February and get the help that I need. So I went home. I saw my normal therapist 2 to 3 times a week. And then I started seeing a new therapist who I did EMDR therapy with. I'll put the actual definition of EMDR therapy up on the screen for you guys. The basis of EMDR therapy, if you haven't heard of it, it's a pretty intense form of therapy where they track the eye movement in your eye when you bring up traumatic events or past memories, something that brings you a lot of hurt, pain, triggers your depression or your anxiety. It's used for trauma patients specifically. A lot of times war heroes, men who suffer with PTSD from being in the army or just serving the country. And basically what it helps you do is reprocess those memories and the trauma into a more positive outlook, meaning that instead of thinking back on the trauma and being terrified and being scared, being anxious, you look back on it and you think of what you learned from that situation or how you've grown from that situation. So now looking back on those specific memories that I worked on with my therapist who I did EMDR with, I don't feel as triggered. I don't feel as anxious or depressed. Part of that is I started writing. I've always had a soft spot for writing. I've never done it publicly. I kept a journal here and there in high school, but I've always loved writing. I'd never really shared my writing with anyone. Over the past year or two, sometimes if I have a dream about my perpetrator or about the sexual assault or things like that, I would write it out in great detail, and it helps me process the trauma and those memories, and then I would share it with my therapist. And at the very end of my 4 weeks being home in Colorado, meeting with 2 therapists, I was going to therapy 3 to 4 times a week and working with the resource center and everything. My therapist that I've been seeing for years gave me a prompt, and she said, I want you to write, it doesn't have to be long, but I want you to write something on, getting like emotional. I want you to write something on being a survivor versus being a victim. And I rewrote this specific paper 3 or 4 times. Like, I would start it, write a couple paragraphs, and I would delete the whole thing. And finally, I wrote it out. I shared it with my normal therapist and my EMDR therapist, and it has helped me immensely work through my trauma and my feelings and grow as a person. And so I'm going to share this piece of writing with you all today. And just as a disclaimer, I'm not sharing my story or putting this out on the internet for pity, for attention, for comfort. I don't want any of those things. I'm purely putting this out there to help other people in my situation. Over the last month, I have met an immense amount of people that I have known almost my entire life who have gone through something similar or the same thing in terms of sexual assault, sexual misconduct, sexual harassment. It is such a common thing, and for the most part, we're told to forget about it, to just move on, to get over it. It's not taken as seriously, and this kind of a thing literally ruins lives. It ruined my life. But I have worked through my trauma and made so much progress in the last 2 years, but especially in the last month, and I just hope that this helps someone else out there. Okay. There is a before and an after in everyone's life. For me, it was before I was a victim and after I was a survivor. Both words go hand in hand, and if it were only about technicality, they would mean the exact same thing. One specific event occurred, turning your entire world upside down. Almost like a child riding a roller coaster due to peer pressure, even though they are terrified of heights. This event is so catastrophic that you will never be able to see the world the same. You think differently, you feel differently, and in my case, you love in a way you thought you would never need to. So what is my life-altering event, you ask? To keep things simple, you can choose. Sexual assault, sexual misconduct, or years of being taken advantage of with sexual harassment, take your pick. No matter how you define it, I was a normal teenage girl turned victim at the ripe age of 15 by someone I trusted. At one point in my life, I might have even said I loved him. which is why I branded myself victim with a bright red scarlet V. No one could see it but me, but that was the problem. It was the only thing I could see. Everyone's trauma takes residence in his or her conscious differently, but a lot of the time, blame is a major selling point. For longer than I would like to admit, the victim inside of me used blame, shame, and embarrassment to remind her just how weak she was. How could you let him hurt you like that? Or even worse, how could you hurt him like that? It's confusing, unfair, and it makes you hate the world. For me, every day that went by where I blamed myself for the trauma that invaded my body, like an infection right in your bloodstream, I crumpled like an old statue in the back of a museum. Every day I let parts of myself go until eventually I ended up a literal shell of a person. The victim that I'd become was nothing more than that, a walking, talking robot programmed to think of nothing but him and what he took from me. And it didn't take long for that sad and broken girl to simply give up. What life was waiting for me if I couldn't sleep, eat, or breathe like everyone else? What was wrong with me? It was a question that stormed over me like an angry rain cloud, constantly reminding you what's in charge. I didn't understand why the person who chewed me up and spit me out was at most times the only thing I could think about. He took my body, my emotions, my sanity, and self-worth. He was like an alternate in the NFL, riding the bench and putting in no effort the entire season. But when his team won the championship, he had no problem taking the victory as if it was his own. It wasn't until I decided that life wasn't worth living anymore, if I had to live the way I was living, that the survivor in me crept out of hibernation and sat silently waiting for her chance to break free. She was the light on a flickering candle, giving hope to a dark room. The sun behind a thunderstorm, saving everyone from the booming, angry sky. She was a vigilante, reminding me that what happened will always be a part of my story, but it didn't have to become a part of who I was. I was cautious about letting her take charge, worried about the possible destruction she might cause. In a way, I had become so comfortable and miserably confident taking on the role of victim that I couldn't see any other way to live my life. But what I've come to realize is that the survivor wasn't here to cause destruction. She was here to tear down the old frame of the crumbling house my life had become and build a brand new home in its place. A home with light and hope. Somewhere that love prevailed and fear was welcomed with open arms because it offered a challenge. And so I write to you presenting my challenge. How exactly does one heal from trauma? How do you go from victim to survivor? Well, to put it simply, there is no black and white answer. Whether I liked it or not, the years I spent playing tug-of-war with one disturbed older man in the end truly had nothing to do with me and had everything to do with him. The way he saw the world, the way he loved, the way he held himself as a man was all a facade to hide his crippling self-doubt and utter confusion of who he was as a person. And for me, I was just a part of his story. He may have hurt me, traumatized me, and at one point made me feel like he took who I was right out from underneath me. But the survivor in me has raised her head and planted her flag and made it known that although we might not understand why terrible things happen, everything happens for a reason. If you let the victim in you rest and take a long-deserved nap and open your arms to the survivor who is ready to hold your hand and walk beside you, you will realize that anything worth fighting for does not come easy. And at the end of it all, when you are ready to close that chapter of your life, the victim in you will want to stay behind, and their survivor will tell her that it's okay. You will be okay. What do you think, Minnie? Okay, you guys, there it is, my story. There's only a very small portion of my story of how I've become who I am as a woman, as a person, as a friend. But I just want you to know that if you're struggling with something similar to me, whether it's mental health, depression, anxiety, PTSD, or you've been assaulted and you're too scared to speak up or you don't know what to do about it, there is help. And there is a bright, bright light at the end of the dark tunnel. It has taken me years to finally be content and be happy with who I am. And a big portion of it is because of this little guy right here. I know a lot of people use emotional support animals as a means of bringing your animal with you on a flight for free or getting out of paying a pet fee in an apartment building. But honestly, emotional support animals, if you genuinely struggle with some type of emotional distress, emotional support animals are a great resource and a great tool. They definitely help you, make you feel a lot less alone and like you are loved. Look at him. Nugs. Wrigley is a huge part of me healing, but also don't be afraid to reach out tell a friend, tell someone in charge. If you're in school, tell a counselor, tell a parent, tell a brother or a sister. There are so many hotlines and resource centers you can reach out to, and I'll provide some numbers of hotlines on the screen. But also, I'm here for you guys too. If you need help with anything, if you're struggling with something, feel free to DM me on Instagram, leave a comment in this video. I just want to help. I want my story to inspire other people to know that it's going to be okay. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please feel free to share it and comment down below your thoughts on it. If you're struggling with something similar, if it helped you or anyone else, don't feel afraid to reach out if you need help. That's it for this week's video, and we will see you guys next week in an all new Meds Monday.